Hello, and welcome back to Impact Factor. I'm your host, Katie Van Aken, and I'm really excited about today's episode for two reasons. One, today is my mother's birthday, October 10th, so happy birthday, Mom. I think you listened to some of these episodes, so I hope you listen to this one. My mom has her PhD in psychology and was one of the biggest reasons that I went on to get my PhD. And I'm hoping to bring her on the show down the line and talk to her about her experience. And the second reason is that today's interview is with Jeanna Kenney, who is getting her PhD in economics, and so we're branching outside the STEM world, and I'm really excited, and I learned a lot from talking to Jeanna, and I hope you do too. Enjoy! So let's jump in. So let's just start from the top. So you are getting your PhD in what and from where?
I'm doing a PhD in applied economics from Wharton, which is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania.
All right, so a lot to unpack here, but let's just for the whole story. So, um, did you major in economics in undergrad?
I did.
Okay, and did you have like an area of focus, like applied economics? Is that a thing in undergrad?
No, so in undergrad, especially at a liberal arts school, it's just a broad economics track. And
Okay.
then applied economics basically just means you're more on the empirical side as opposed to theoretical. So in my program, where our research is around more like specific applied questions that we're using data to answer as opposed to like proving these broader theoretical economic behaviors.
I see. Okay, so in the way that you're proving them, what is an example of how you do that?
So from the applied perspective, we
Yeah.
basically have the broad question is how does X affect Y, really?
Okay.
And then
Sure.
so you find some type of data set and we learn what we call econometrics, which is basically statistics for economists. And the big challenge for applied economists is this whole separation of correlation versus causation. So it's really easy in a data set to prove if X goes this way, Y goes that way. But to prove that Y is going that way because X is going this way is a lot harder, especially in a social science like economics. There's lots of variables you can't control the way you might be able to control them in a lab. And so we have to then turn to statistical tools that help us sort of make a more convincing case that this is precisely the reason why Y has changed.
Okay, cool. And the um the data sets that you're using, do you design experiments to collect these data sets, or are these like available to you?
So it depends. There is a subfield of economics called experimental economics, and those people will design lab experiments, usually with either like students or just broad, we call them workers, but they're usually from like online services. Like Amazon provides these worker platforms where you can basically like get people, like pay people to answer your surveys and questions. So there are people who do that. They want to, and they're probably more particularly asking questions about behavioral decisions people are making, like why people, for instance, spend their money in a certain way or how altruistic people are with each other, those kinds of things. For the large majority of applied economics, we're using data sets that we get either from companies or from the government. Sometimes you can convince firms to give you their data. That's a little bit harder to do. And so it just depends. So I'm at Wharton, which is obviously a pretty well-resourced school. So there's a handful of data sets that they have that Wharton has paid for. There's lots of publicly available data out there. So like the census is available to anyone. There's a lot of research that uses that kind of data. So it just depends the kind of question you're looking for, but that usually is half the battle for applied economists is finding the data to answer the questions you're interested in.
Interesting. So I'm actually I just so I use this Google Surveys app and I answer questions, and every couple days it'll be like answer this question and here's 10 cents, and then I'll be able to like rent a movie. And so now I'm thinking that some of those questions are exactly what you're talking about, because they're like, did you go to CVS and did you keep your receipt? Like all of these behavior questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very cool. Um, so you're in a the department itself is applied economics, or is that or yeah.
Yeah, so this will be dependent on the school. So at Wharton, the way the applied econ program is set up is it's a program that's run by two different departments, the real estate department and the business economics and public policy department, if you will.
All the words.
Yeah, so many words. So Wharton's a little different in that Penn has like a School of Arts and Sciences that has an economics PhD. Most universities have a pure economics PhD. Some business schools have their own econ PhD, which is what I'm doing. So most of the time, the department is just like an economics department. I'm in a bit of a special case being through a business school.
Okay, cool. But I can see why that would be valuable because the professors, I imagine, are the business school professors, or is there overlap?
Yes, so sometimes there's joint appointments across the schools, but the faculty that I work with the most are business school professors.
So do you have a research advisor and a research group? How does that work?
So we usually eventually have a committee, which is just 3 to 4 faculty who are the ones who evaluate your dissertation and sort of keep track of your milestones. There's usually one primary advisor on that committee who's just the point person, but you're pretty much working with everyone on it. So yes, I have 4 committee members. One of them is what we call the chair of the committee. So he's, I guess, most in charge of my progress, but I meet with all 4 members of the committee pretty regularly to update them on my research.
That's interesting because I feel like one of my suggestions to students in like the science field is that they meet with their committee more regularly because there's this very close relationship in my experience in the sciences with your PI, like your main professor, but then you only really talk to your committee when you do your maybe annual presentation or like, and so it's almost like a whole year has passed and they have no idea what pivots you made or what direction you went. And so I always think it's a good idea to meet more frequently with them, which sounds like you do just by default.
Yeah, I think it is sort of the default to try to get as many different perspectives as you can. So I think we're encouraged to keep all of them in the loop. I also don't know how it works in the sciences in terms of academic jobs, but I know for econ, if you want an academic job, you usually need like 3 recommendation letters. And those letters are probably going to be a little more detailed and effective if they're actually pretty familiar with your research process. So part of it is just like keeping the relationship there so that you have more than one person who's capable of going to bat for you. But I think also because our like data are like there's no like equivalent of a lab per se in a
Right.
field like economics, so it's not like there truly is one person who holds the resources I need. And so in that sense, like the chair is symbolic in a way, and that's why
Yeah.
I think why there's a little bit more of an equal dynamic across the committee members.
So, speaking of resources, so where does your funding come from?
So I get a stipend that's funded through Wharton. So like basically the MBA students who pay a lot in tuition are the
Okay.
ones who are funding my existence right now. Um, and a lot of I can speak to econ, but I think this is how it works in a lot of social science programs that the funding is tied to that department's budget.
Hmm.
So we don't have that sort of setup where we're trying to like get grants or we're tied to our PI's grant funding.
So the department itself has like a certain amount of spots, a certain amount of funding for spots to fill.
Yes, and most programs in economics, the majority will like guarantee you funding if you get in.
Hmm.
Some will let people in and say like we're giving you an unfunded offer and you could choose to pay the tuition and like find a funding source yourself. But for the most part, they're not letting you in unless they have the ability to fund you.
And do you TA or anything to for the department as well?
Yes. So for most programs, you're going to have to do some sort of TA or research assistant work. for free. I put that in quotes because you're doing it to earn that stipend. The nice thing is a lot of times you can go above and beyond what that requirement is and get paid for additional work. So it's not like you're entirely doing unpaid per se labor the entire time, but you do have to do a little bit to earn that stipend.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the sciences. I mean, a lot of times if the money comes from the department, you have to TA, and if it comes from a specific research grant, you're doing that research, I guess. But um, that's cool. I've always wondered that. I guess I could have just asked you. Okay, so I have more questions. So
Yes.
let's go back to when you graduated undergrad. What made you decide to get your PhD? Did you go right into PhD?
So I worked first. So to really rewind, when I was in undergrad, I spent one summer doing research for a professor at Haverford, where I did my undergrad. And I really enjoyed that experience. That was, I think, the first time I realized that economics research was a thing that you could
Yeah.
do as a career. I didn't really understand academia at all until then, and I remember thinking it was super cool that she kind of was getting paid to just pursue the questions that interested her.
Yeah.
And so that's when the seed was planted for me that this might be a fun path for me to take. I don't know that fun is the word I'd use to describe the path, but it has been a journey. And so the application process for econ programs is super competitive. So I knew coming out of undergrad I wouldn't be ready to apply right away. And so I worked as a research assistant at one of the Federal Reserve banks. And so I worked with an economist for 2 years doing research with him, which I think was good. Like build up a little bit of savings before I was living the stipend life, which I'm very grateful for now. And also it just gives you a chance to sort of view that research process firsthand, full time, like see what it looks like to full time be devoting yourself to doing research. And that's what I recommend to everyone considering PhDs is just like make sure you want to do it before you dive right in, because it is quite the commitment to make, and there's a lot of not so easy moments along the way. So just like going into it knowing you want to do it, I think helps. It's at least helped me. And so yes, I worked for 2 years, and while I was working, that's when I did I took the GRE. I worked on my cover letters and applications and stuff like that. It almost honestly felt like a part-time job in and of itself, applying. So I don't know that I would have been able to pull it off as an undergrad, actively applying while still finishing college. So yeah, that was sort of my path to the PhD program.
So did you find it hard when you were working to pump yourself up to go back to school? Or was
Yeah,
that kind of always the plan, so it felt like the path?
it's funny because I think like working for 2 years, it was enough of, by the time you're done college, you're like, I'm so ready to just like be done with school. And after 2 years of working, it's like, I'm so ready to be done with jobs.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think and I joke now that I'm just like, I'm so ready to be done with grad school. But I'm sure once I'm living a more structured life, I'm going to be like, man, I miss the like freedom of,
The 9 to 5 life is tough, right? Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's funny. I think for me, like the 9 to 5 life in hindsight was great because you can turn it off at 5 o'clock
Yep.
and not have to worry about it till the next morning. Whereas here, your research is always kind of there, and you're your own boss, so there's no clocking out of your own life. So in that sense, I do miss the 9 to 5. I think if I go back to a 9 to 5 style job after this, I'm going to miss the flexibility that I have, since that's the other side of being your own boss is I can schedule a doctor's appointment without having to wonder if that's okay with someone else. And,
Yep.
I
Yep.
can move my work around so that I'm free on a random weekday because I need to do something. And so I think that for sure I'm going to miss. But I think while I was working, I was kind of ready to get back into the school life, which I probably regretted immediately looking back
Yeah.
at that first year of grad school. I was probably like, why did I do this to myself? But yeah, there are pros and cons to both lifestyles, and I'm sure with anything else, the grass is greener.
Always, yeah. For those 2 years when you were working, do you think you gained some like skills that um, put you in a better place for completing your PhD? Like, because you were doing research, right? So were you learning like tools or something that, benefit you now?
Yeah, it definitely gave me more time to sort of work on, especially like my statistical tools. So a lot of what I do now is like coding and programming to run statistical analysis. And so just like those 2 years of having a lot of that is just learned by doing,
Yeah,
like you have to figure out it's hard to learn every possible command ahead of time that you can run
right.
in a program. But when you have an actual tangible project in front of you, that's how you learn these things. So I think I definitely got tooled up in that sense over the 2 years. I also, when we did have to write an undergrad thesis where I did my undergrad. And so I did have a little bit of experience in coming up with a research question and trying to do it, but I think the standard is different when you're an undergrad.
Mm.
And so working for an economist and watching him go like beginning to end on a research project, I think just gave me a better perspective on what it was going to look like when I had to do it on my own that I don't think I would have been prepared for had I gone straight from undergrad.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I mean, that's good. I'm glad to hear that because, sometimes, you go work for a company and you feel like you are now 2 years behind in your education process. But I think in different fields it's different. And I think a lot of times it depends on the person too.
For sure.
So speaking of your research, what is your research question?
Yes, that's the $1 million question. You sound like my advisor right now. No.
Are we not at
So
that stage yet? How
no, no,
how does
no.
that
I
work?
am. I am. So,
Okay.
like, broadly speaking, I do real estate and urban economics. So, I study the decisions people make when they buy and sell homes and how they decide where to go and what that means for what our neighborhoods look like.
Huh.
So, my dissertation specifically, so for more information on how econ PhDs work, our dissertation is basically what we call 3 chapters.
Okay.
So, it's 3 papers. 2 of them don't matter so much. The third is what we call our job market paper, and this is like your crowning achievement of graduate
Okay.
school, and that's the paper that I'm going to use to convince people to hire me when I'm done.
Gotcha.
So that's when people talk about their dissertation in econ, they're probably talking about that paper most specifically. I do have other projects on the side that will fill in the other chapters of the dissertation, but so that main paper is going to be about the licensing process for real estate agents and how that labor market bleeds into the housing market.
Interesting.
Yes.
So like interesting. So like the selling side and the buying side or the not the selling, but the agent side. Yeah, that's interesting.
Have you ever
Yeah.
seen Selling Sunset?
My sister-in-law watches it a lot, so I've been in the room when it's on, but I don't
Well, it's
watch.
funny because that show has made it a lot easier to describe my
Explain.
research because now people know the dynamics of a real estate firm.
Yeah.
But basically, in real estate, there's 2 types of licenses. There's like the base level license, and then you can get a second type of license. And the interesting thing that's specific to real estate and not we don't see in other licensed industries is that if you have that base level license, you have to be employed by someone with the second level license in order to
Uh,
work. And so that creates interesting competitive dynamics across firms. And so I'm trying to see if those firm dynamics then affect how efficient local housing markets are, since pretty much everyone sells their home with an agent. It's a very high proportion.
yeah.
And so my hypothesis is that the way firms are interacting with each other and agents within the firm are interacting is going to have an impact on how quick homes are turning over in local markets.
Interesting. I feel like you should have one of your references just be Selling Sunset like that.
Yeah,
Like
right.
refer to this TV show.
First
Um,
slide, the
yeah,
Oppenheim group.
exactly. Um, that's super cool. So the three papers though, are they all completed at the end, or is it like, are those the milestones? What are the big milestones for your degree?
Yeah, so most programs will have either like a second or third year paper. So you finish your coursework usually in the first 2 years and have to pass out of all of that to remain in the program.
Hmm.
And then the first big milestone is a paper. Um, Standard is not, they expect it to be a fully complete research paper, but the idea is like, let's get one under your belt early in case this is your first bad idea. And
Gotcha.
just, learn about what that process looks like, start to make relationships with faculty who can be your advisor, start to think about topics that excite you. So you have to pass that paper requirement. And then the next thing that comes is what we call a proposal defense. So that's you pick your committee members, you sit them down and you propose what your full dissertation will be. So you talk mostly about that main paper that I mentioned, but you'll kind of highlight the other stuff you're working on. And then after that just comes the dissertation defense. So it's a little scary in the sense there's not a lot along the way. So it's very
Yeah.
self-guided in that sense. But there's a lot of freedom to sort of pivot, which is nice in a field where I think there's a lot of subjectivity in what's interesting in any given moment. So it's kind of nice to have that flexibility to not have to like constantly be chasing a deadline and sort of giving your work the time it needs to evolve into a fully fledged research project.
And what's the general timeline for completion on average?
So generally, the trend these days is 6 years.
Interesting.
So it's 2 years for coursework and then 3 years to write that dissertation. And then the last year is what we call your market year in economics. So that's when you basically spend that entire last year applying to and interviewing for jobs.
Wow. Interesting. That's cool that that's kind of baked in, I guess. It's a whole, and it's also hard, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty much a year-long process. So that's the tough part. I think traditionally the standard was 5 years, and I think as over the last decade or so, it's been trending more towards 6. And COVID, I don't think helped that because there's basically like a whole year where everyone took a year off from going on the job market, and so that sort of pushed everyone back after them. So it's pretty much 6 years. There's a little bit of difference in terms of like what type of job you're targeting. So for academic jobs, like if you want to be a professor, they really look at the quality of that job market paper, and so you kind of need that extra year to really tailor that. If you're going to industry like consulting or a tech job, they're not as concerned about your specific paper. They just want to see that you've gotten your PhD and completed it. So you will see, I think you're starting to see more so now, like the people who end up going to industry finish up in 5 years. The people who want to try for academic jobs take that 6 year to really juice up their job market paper.
And you're leaning industry, I gather.
So I'm targeting academic jobs, but
Okay, cool.
it's just
Cool.
super competitive in the sense that, first of all, there's more of us than there are positions.
Yeah.
And it really is dependent year to year just on like what schools happen to have openings, and like within the openings they have, are they in the field that you study? So I like to say it's sort of the best you can do is like put your name in a really competitive lottery, right? Yep. So like there's only so much under my control, and so I have to write a really good job market paper to be able to enter that lottery. But once I'm in the pool, a certain amount of it is
Cross
just
your
noise.
fingers.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, like I would be fine with industry as a backup option, and probably a more likely option if I'm being honest. But you never know. It's just you have to give up a certain amount of control, as I'm sure any academic understands.
Yeah, I mean similar in science, but I think all over there's more applicants than there are positions in the academia world. So I have maybe a dumb question as a scientist, but these papers that you're talking about, are you publishing these in journals or are these not?
Yes, so that is
They
the
are.
goal to
Okay.
get them published. It's a
Okay.
little, from what I understand, the timeline is a lot longer in economics, so it can take like years to get a
Wow.
paper published.
Okay.
So I
So
like
your graduation is not, or your degree is not dependent on them being published. It just that's the eventual goal.
yeah, so correct. So like it would be pretty impressive. So people do have a publication or two by the time they graduate. Usually if you do, it's because you have a co-author who was faculty, or you were working on someone at a job you had before you started the PhD. So yeah, you're basically getting hired based on your publication potential.
Okay.
And then it's like the tenure clock where the pressure to publish really kicks in, but to get the job itself, you're not really expected to have publications.
Okay.
I
So
should say also in the econ world, because I know from my friends in the sciences, in econ, like you're really only counted as an author on a paper if you like helped originate the idea and have been on it from front to end. So you can like as a research assistant pretty much do all of the grunt work for the paper, and all you'll get is like a mention in a footnote on the first page.
Yep.
So it's a little harder in that sense to get publications, in that like you truly need to be like fully on the paper. It's not like, I know in some disciplines, I think if you like make a couple of the graphs or like write a few paragraphs, you're counted as an author, which I would prefer that be the method, but you know, it is what it is. And so in that, I think because of that, that's why like publication records aren't as robust in economics as they might seem in other fields.
And that's a good example of something that's very different in different fields, but also like seems like it's so important in certain one, you know, like in the sciences, there are people hired based on how many papers they have, quantity, and also like what journals they're in, you know, and but when you think about how maybe quote easy it is to get your name like on a science paper, sorry, that sounded like I meant the science journal. I mean like a technical like whatever scientific paper. You know, it just that kind of metric seems so squishy, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's problems in every field with the reliance on publications as the measure, because there's also, you run into the ideas of like gatekeeping at these journals, and you know, there's a sort of an inertia that the longer you've been around, the more people know you, the easier it is to get your work published. So it's hard to break in even in the first place. But the other interesting thing about econ publishing is usually on papers, the authors are listed alphabetically, not by contribution amount. Which is funny because my last name is like square in the middle, so I always tease that I gotta find a husband with a double A last name.
I mean my name is at the very bottom, so I would not be thrilled with that.
So all you Aaronsons listening out there,
yeah, there you go.
Hit me up.
She's on the market, everyone. This just became a dating podcast.
I know, right? I need an A last name.
So okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. Are there other things that you are involved in at like in your department outside of like research, like I don't know, organizations, stuff like that?
So we have a Wharton Doctoral Council, which is basically like the student council for all of the PhD students in the business school. So I am a member of that. It's, you know, it sounds fancy, but we mostly plan social events just to get everyone out of the office for a few hours here and there. It is funny though, trying to plan social events for a bunch of PhD students, because it is really tough to convince people to step away from their work, but we do our best. So that's probably the big thing that I'm involved in within the school itself.
That's cool. I always found that it was useful to have something like that, because then, like you said, it's hard to pull yourself away, but if you have like that accountability of like, well, someone's expecting me to do this, so I need to do it. And also if you're like so fed up with whatever research or is going wrong, you can be like, I'm just gonna go work on my social event for a second, you know, I'm gonna just take a break. And then what about you as a person outside of this life? Do you have any hobbies? Do you have time for that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, does binge watching Netflix count as a hobby?
Of course.
But, you know, I always find time for that. No, so I actually, I played volleyball when I was in college, and fortunately I've ended up at a school not so far from my undergrad institution. So I help coach the volleyball team there when I can. These days, that amounts to maybe once a week I pop in, but that's been a really fun thing that I've been grateful to have. Like you said, it's nice to have that outlet where people are sort of expecting you.
Yeah.
Because it really does get you to get up and get away, and it's so nice to be able to turn your brain off from academic things, even if it's just for a few hours each day. So yes, I do that. In the spare time that I do have, I like to read.
Oh.
Especially I was very much like, if I have a few hours at night, I'm watching Netflix. But then the pandemic happened, and I was like, I need a hobby that's not a screen, because
Yeah.
I was just staring at the screen for like 8 hours a day, and then it's like I can't stare at another screen for the next five. So
I hear ya.
I started reading a lot more during the pandemic, and fortunately have kept up with that, which is nice. And then I'm a big Philly sports girl. I was like born and raised in the area. So again, don't know if that counts as a hobby per se, but I do like to watch sports and get to Phillies games when I can.
Well, the current state of the Philly teams are probably helping your mood, I imagine.
This is true. I know. The Phillies are in the playoffs for the first time in a very long time. Although, being an East Coast sports fan is the worst, because these games don't start until like 7 o'clock p.m. and baseball games are long. So I've got some long nights ahead of me if they have a good
Yeah,
playoff run.
I know. And when like the Eagles play on like a Monday night, I get through like the first quarter and then I'm like I have to go to bed.
I know, it's like halftime starts like precisely at like 10 p.m. every game. And like,
Yeah.
you're just tempting me too much. Like, this is bedtime. I can't do this.
I read something that the last time the Phillies were in the playoffs was the last time we had a recession. So,
Oh, fun.
yeah. So there you go. There's some economics
There we
trivia
go.
for you.
There's a good example of correlation and causation.
Yeah.
Are the
Let's go with
Phillies causing
correlation.
recessions? Yes.
Yeah. Or is the recession causing them to do well?
You never know.
Don't know.
That maybe I'll pivot. That'll be my dissertation.
Okay, so there are a couple questions that I ask everyone, or that I have asked everyone. One of them is, well, hold on. Something challenging that you faced. Wait, what year are you now?
I'm a fifth
You're
year.
you're in, okay, cool. This is great then. So you've had 5 years. So what
Yes.
what is something that was challenging for you when whenever?
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned, I worked for 2 years, and that was good because I think it did expose me to what the research project process looked like. Um, I think one thing that I wasn't anticipating, though, is just how many research ideas you'll have to kill. Um, and there's like a dozen reasons why a given research idea won't work, whether it's, you can't find the data, you can't find a convincing statistical tool to make it work. Someone else has already done it. People don't find it interesting. There's tons of reasons, and I think like to land on the job market paper idea that I'm working on now, it took. I think there's probably like 6 other iterations of that before I got to it, and I don't think that I was prepared for that going into it, and it's hard not to take that personally or like see that as a personal failure as a researcher, that like I can't make these ideas work, I can't convince
Yeah.
people I'm interesting. So I think I wish I was like more mentally prepared for that process, because it is like something that everyone goes through, and you talk to your faculty advisors and they're like, of course I've killed 700 ideas.
Yeah.
Like it's a very normal thing, but that I think was challenging, because it's like, there's nothing guaranteeing you'll come up with a good question. And so that's like a scary thing to be dealing with, was like, I can't guarantee that the next idea I have is going to work. So it's like, how many do I have to come up with before I'm going to land on one that I can actually build a dissertation around?
Yeah. Yeah, that unknown is challenging. So are you the one who are you the killer of the ideas, or do you have like are you advised to kill an idea based on other people's knowledge?
It depends. More often than not, it's the advisors killing the idea, but they're doing it
Okay.
from a place of love, you know.
Of course, of course.
They don't want to, they know they've been around the block, so they kind of have a better idea of what is likely to be successful and not. So I think that the balance that we all struggle with is, giving a project long enough for it to like have a chance versus
Mm,
not spending too much time on it that you've wasted time on an idea that wasn't going to work. And I think the most successful econ grad students are the ones who have nailed that balance better,
yeah.
because you don't want to like kill off something too early because you're afraid people aren't going to like it because maybe you'll find something really interesting in the process, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to spend like a year on a topic that you're really just like digging in the data and it's not doing what you want it to do, and then you find yourself with like no results to show for it. So yeah, sometimes you kill your own ideas because you're just like, this is too frustrating and I'm not interested in
Right.
it anymore, or you find something more interesting in the process that you'd rather spend your time on. But more often than not, it's your advisor saying, look, you've given this a good go, but I think let's start going back to the drawing board.
Do you foresee this being something that you would continue to have to do in the world of academia as a researching professor, perhaps?
Yes, although I think, especially once you're tenured, there's less of a pressure, obviously. I think that also the thing that changes once you're out of grad school is you collaborate a little more. So I think like the goal of grad school is to prove that like I can do good research, but once you've proven that, then you start writing a lot of papers with other people. So that allows you to just be more productive in general, but I think then it's easier to sort of, since you have multiple people on the project, coming up with the project, I think the quality of each idea gets a little bit better, and like you can figure out a little bit faster whether or not something's going
Yeah.
to work or not when there's more of you working on it and pushing it forward.
And if it does get killed, you get to share that burden together, just like when you lose a volleyball game, right?
Indeed, right? Yeah, it's not
Yes.
like this didn't work because I am not good enough at
Right.
econ. It's like this didn't work because it was never going to work and we
Sounds
tried.
exactly like grad school. It's just like trying to make you feel like the worst and then also being like, but if you can make it, you're great. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
that's funny. Um, well, so this might lead into my next question, but my next question is about some advice you would give to yourself in year one. So, do
So
you?
yeah, so I think about this a lot because each year we get a new crop of excited first years who are about to spend the next 2 years doing this really terrible coursework that's going to make them feel awful. So I think it took me way too long to learn when to call it a night. I think,
Oh,
and I explained this a lot, that for me, grad school was the first time where there wasn't a direct correlation between like how hard I worked and how well I did. Like in undergrad, I felt like if I just studied
yeah,
longer or did all the homework or worked
right,
the extra hour, I would get more done. Whereas like in grad school, there was just so much material being thrown at me, and it was so hard that like I could work 24 hours a day and still not really be processing all of it. And they don't
right.
expect you to, right? But like the type of person that gets in to a PhD program is the type of person that still
Yeah.
wants to get all of it, even if they're not expected to.
And like
Um,
you just have to pass, right? You don't have to like ace everything,
Right,
right?
exactly. And the idea is like you're going to specialize anyway. So the goal of
Yeah,
the coursework in the first 2 years is to give you that foundation to be able to like engage with other people's research, but it's not for you to become an expert in every single economic theory that was ever proven.
right.
And so I think I wasted a lot of time and energy just like staring at problems my first year, and like studying for exams where that marginal hour of studying would have been
Yep.
better spent like in the gym or sleeping or like calling my
Yeah.
mom. And so I think that's like, if I could go back and do it over again, I think it took me towards like well into my second year to realize like at a certain point you're not going to like process any more information by staring at this another hour, so like go use that hour to take care of yourself in a more effective way.
Like the good enough moment, right? The moment where you're
Yes.
that's enough. Yeah.
Yes, the moment where like I've maxed out what I can effectively do right
Yeah.
now on this, and so,
Do
you
you think
know,
you're better at that now?
I do. I think well, first of all, I'm not like handing in problem sets every week, so that makes it a little easier when there's not. Then the tough thing is like when there was always a deadline approaching.
Yeah.
It's hard to feel like you're not trying hard enough if you're not just like working until the deadline.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of went away as the deadlines got spaced out. But I do think just in general now I've learned like if I spend an hour in the gym in the morning as opposed to getting to my office an hour early, like I don't think the quality of my work has decreased. And yet I feel better as a person. I have
Right.
more energy throughout the day. Um, so I think I've gotten better at prioritizing, like sleep comes first. Working out is okay to fit in every day. I'm not slacking if I decide I want to spend an hour in the gym each day.
Yeah.
It's okay to walk away from my desk for an hour and get coffee with a friend because I just don't want to be staring at the computer anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think in the beginning it was easy to convince myself that if I wasn't working hard enough or doing enough if I were doing all these like non-academic things.
Well, that's really good advice. I am taking that as my own advice too. So that's good enough. We're done. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so one more question is, do you have a like a story or a fun memory that you'll look back on? Maybe it was a conference or a trip with your colleagues. I don't know. Anything to tell to share?
So I will say I was recently at a conference in DC just this past week actually, which was very cool because um, a few people from my program who had graduated were there. So I stayed with a
Oh,
friend who graduated from the program who's now working in consulting in DC. Another friend who has since graduated was at the conference, but in his capacity as now an economist at one of the reserve banks. So that was really cool for us all to sort of be there in our new lives and just to sort of reunite, but like to see that there is a world after this. It's very easy to get locked into like the grad school world and not be able to envision what comes next. So that was fun. However, I do think the more entertaining story to tell right now, as we talk about how awful my coursework was the first 2 years, there was one class. It was called macroeconomics. It was very, very hard. It's not at all close to what I'm specializing in. So it wasn't something I really like needed, but it was a core course. We had to take it. I sit down for this final. Within 5 minutes, I've like pretty much answered all of the things I'm capable of answering. So now I'm
yep.
sitting there like, okay, I have like an hour and a half to kill. What do I
Oh,
do? So I'm just like, I do that thing they always say to do, but that never actually works, which is just like write something, don't leave anything blank.
yep.
So literally next to one question, I was like, I don't know how to answer this, but here are some facts about the Great Depression. I kid you not. Just like a few bullet
Like
points
I don't
about
know
like
this, but this
things
is
we
what I do
learned.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Did it
Needless to
work?
say, I did not get points for that question, but it was
Damn it.
fine. I passed the course; it didn't matter. But so literally every year now, it's become a tradition in my program that like I took a picture of that once we got the exams back, and we like send it to the first years every year. And I'm like, look, I did that on an exam, and I'm still
It's
here,
okay. Yeah, it's okay.
so you'll be fine.
That's great. That
Yes.
reminds me of we had a safety presentation when you first start, and there's always pictures of like those like infamous safety accidents that happened, and this is like this is what this guy did, like don't be him, and you're like this is what I did and I'm here and we're fine. That's good.
Yes.
Well, that's a good story. I feel like you, yeah, that's funny. Okay, well, that's sort of all my questions. Is there anything else I missed? Anything you want to share to the world of the audio world?
You know, if you are on dating apps and you see someone who's getting a PhD in econ, don't immediately respond with, "Oh, cool, I invest too."
Yo, that's a
Don't.
great tip.
Yeah, right. A good pro tip. No, I think, but the broader point I'm making there is, I think econ is such a cool field because what people don't realize about it is we're basically just studying how people make decisions under certain constraints. And so econ is so much more than interest rates and
Yeah.
home buying. So it's fun for me to be able to talk about it to other people because I think it surprises people that we study other things than what the interest rate is right now.
Yeah. Well, it seems like too, like there's a lot of data analytics that go into your research, and I feel like data analytics has sort of exploded as a field, but it's way more broad, and this is almost like, yes, but the data is about like humans and how they do things, right?
Exactly. I have classmates who study, I have one classmate studying like access to food banks. I have someone doing experimental economics in my program who looks at like gender dynamics in negotiation situations. So it's like there's such a wide range of things that my friends in economics study. And I think that that's really what drew me to the field in the beginning. And so if you have a friend, if you hear of someone doing an econ PhD, definitely ask them what they're studying, because I'm sure it's gonna surprise you.
I'm sure glad I did. Well, this is great. Look, maybe we'll catch up with you in a couple years when you're an economist or a professor. See
Fingers
how
crossed.
it's working out for you. But thanks so much for coming on the show. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Cool. Well, thanks to Jeanna for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.